people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, certified Christian counselor and director of Ottawa's Elam Counselling Services.
Hi, I'm Melissa Waggett, co-host of the Life Transformation radio show, and I want to thank you for joining us today. This is a Christian counseling radio show where chains are broken and lives are transformed. And with me in studio today, I have Michael Hart, director of Elam Counselling Service, a Christian counseling ministry here in Ottawa. And if you're not familiar with Elam Counseling, you can learn more about us at elamcounselingministries.com, or you can give us a call at 613-699-1677. Or if you're on Twitter or Facebook, please check out our pages there or tweet at us. Elam provides counseling service from a Christian perspective for individuals, couples, and families. And what's really great is we're able to provide this service often at subsidized rates for some of our clients who may have financial needs due to the generous donations of people in the community. And we're really excited to announce, actually, Elam Counseling Ministries has just recently obtained nonprofit organization status for those of you who are interested in giving to this ministry so we can help meet the needs of those in our community. And so, as I said, with me in studio, as always, is Michael Hart, the director of Elam Counseling Service. Welcome, Michael. Good to see you as always.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and it's good to be here.
Yeah, and so as always, we have a really neat show today, and it's an interesting topic that I think some people may have seen on TV because it can be quite dramatic, and it's the topic of hoarding. And as I said, there's TV shows on about it, and you can really see how for some people it's not just clutter; it goes beyond that. So hopefully through today's show, we'll be able to share with the listeners a little bit more about this condition. And hopefully give some tips about people who may be experiencing this or maybe living or loving someone who's going through this, how they can come out of this condition.
Absolutely. And I think it is said that we are all hoarders to some extent, like we fall somewhere on the spectrum. I think we can all say that we may have things that we find it very hard to let go of, and we might have things that we are holding on to, and others around us, such as our spouse, will be saying, why don't you just get rid of that? But it's difficult because there is some sentimental value, and for some people it's books, for others it's magazines, for other people it may be records or CDs. But I think to some extent we're all hoarders. But the kind of hoarder that I'm talking about here today when we do this show about hoarding are people who have kept possessions to the point where it's now becoming problematic. In some of these cases, the possessions that they have is taking over their household. There's limited space in which to move and so forth. So the family members who are observing the living space of this person realize that the hoarding has become a problem, even if the person who is keeping those possessions do not realize it at that point in time.
So as you said there, Michael, we all have this degree of hoarding within us. So when you're interacting with a client or a family member, what kind of questions do you ask them to know when the person has crossed the line from that person who may just have that box of old birthday and Christmas cards under the bed to someone where it's actually more of an illness or more of a condition?
That's a very good question, Melissa. So for people who are hoarding stuff, there is actually assessment that you have to do to see where they are on the spectrum and whether or not it has become problematic. So some of the typical questions that we ask is, for example, how much do these symptoms interfere with schoolwork or your social life? So if a person is hoarding, has it gotten to a point where it's now interfering with their social life? There are people who have come in to see me where they haven't had anybody over to their house for 10 years. They can't have a social life because they can't get close to anyone because of fear of people finding out how they are living. So we also find out we also assess to see the kind of anxiety that these people have in parting with things that they have. So these are some of the questions that we would ask to find out where they are. Another question is, what level of anxiety do you feel when you think of parting with the things that you are keeping? How long have you had some of these possessions? What do others in your household say about the things that you're keeping? And as we begin to ask these kind of questions, we kind of get a better picture as to where these people are on the spectrum and whether or not it has become problematic.
So how common is the problem of hoarding?
Some statistics show that it may be as high as 5% of the population that has a problem with hoarding. So before it was thought to be a very, very, very few, it was thought that very few people had problems with hoarding, but the recent studies are showing that it's around 5% of the population.
And is part of the difficulty in nailing down the number, the fact that there is so much secrecy around this type of condition?
Absolutely. There's a lot of secrecy around people who hoard. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of feeling sometimes from family members where they don't want to admit that, that their loved one has this disorder, and they sometimes go into denial and refuse to talk about it. But people around the family knows that there's something strange. Why is it that I'm never able to go over to, for example, my father-in-law's house or grandpa's house? And so a lot of time there's a lot of secrecy and shame around it, but it's a lot more common than was once thought.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk about hoarding, is it actually a mental disorder or a condition that's diagnosable? Or is it more just a bad habit? Like someone just likes stuff, or maybe they're a little clutter bug?
So before it was thought that hoarding has to do with OCD, when in the 1980s, in the DSM-3, it was thought to be like one of the symptoms of OCD. But in the DSM-5, hoarding was actually listed as a specific category of mental disorder. So it is now considered to be a disorder, and it is something that requires treatment for people to get rid of. Now, this can be a frustration for family members, because family members will sometimes say to the person, why don't you just get rid of the things? Why don't you just throw these things out? But if it's good to understand that it's not as simple as that. There are psychological factors that are making it very difficult for this person to part with their possessions, and there are specific ways of thinking that has become deep-rooted in the minds of these people that make it very hard for them to part with their possessions.
Mm-hmm. So what are the causes that contribute to the fact that these things, and in a lot of cases, like when you watch the TV shows, the things people in these shows are holding on to, it's not like, in some cases, like diamond rings and luxurious fears. In some cases, it's literally garbage that people can't let go of. And you see these stories where families are saying, it's us or the stuff. And it's so hard for people to let go of this stuff. What factors are causing this such anxiety around letting go of these things to the point they'll give up family and friends?
Well, I think there is cognitive distortion around their possessions. So for people who hoard, it's a way of thinking that they have developed that causes them to feel that they can't part with the things that they have. And this may be broken down into 4 specific areas of cognitive distortion. The first area says that my possessions are unique. The things that I have, I won't be able to find these things anywhere else. These possessions are one of a kind in the world, whereas family members looking on will say, no, that's garbage and you don't really need it. But for these people, I have to hold on to this possession because it is special and it's unique. I think the second thing is that for some people who hoard, they have an exaggerated sense of responsibility. So for you family members who are listening, or if you are struggling with hoarding, you can maybe be able to identify with this one, where you have a sense of responsibility that you're keeping this thing because one day in the future, not you, someone out there may need it. So there's a sense of responsibility that a person have, that they are keeping this thing. They have no need for it, but someone out there might need it. And I guess you're right. So to us, a sub branch of that might be they're keeping things because sometime in the future they might need it. But the responsibility that we're talking about here actually goes towards others. I'm keeping this thing, this shoe from the 1970s because my daughter's son, my grandson might need it, and so I'm not throwing away my shoes from my childhood because I'm going to give this to someone who's going to need it in the future. But the family members are saying, I don't need that shoes. I will never get my grandson will never put that on. Throw it away. But they feel that they have to have this, and they have to have this put away for someone in the future. And then the third thing is that they feel that the possessions that they have present potential future opportunities. That is one of the reasons behind hoarding. So there are people who feel that I can't part with what I have because these things are going to make me rich in the future. There's an opportunity that is going to come up for me in the future where I'm going to use these things that I have. I'm going to sell these things that I have, and it's going to help to move me along in life. There's going to be an opportunity that's going to come up for these things in the future. So people, for example, who have records from the 60s, and they're feeling that these things are growing in value. Others around them are saying, no, it's junk. Nobody is going to need your records that you have. Nobody used those records play anyway, so they'll never be able to play it, right? So they're thinking that there's going to be an opportunity. These songs are opportunities for me to make money in the future. And then the other one is that people's cognitive distortion causes them to feel that the possessions that they hold possess hard to come by knowledge. This is usually in the case of books, magazines, newspapers from the 60s. And so these people will have these things where they're saying, no, I can't throw that magazine, I can't throw that paper out from 1960 because there is information here that is very hard to come by. Now, the younger generation will go on the internet and find that information in 2 seconds. But nevertheless, these people feel that, no, I have to keep that magazine because this knowledge is very hard to come by. And I think we could have a fifth category there as well, where people sometimes have a scarcity mentality, where they feel you never know what's going to happen, and I don't want to leave myself vulnerable. So I am going to keep this canned food, even though it has expired 10 years ago. I'm going to hold on to it because you never know. There might be starvation in the future, and I might need to open that can of food. Whereas the others who are looking on is saying, no, throw them away. They are not good. They're all expired. And one of the things that we find with hoarders, as we begin to help hoarders and family members begin to go through the things, some of these things are actually useless. They're no good. The canned foods, they're spoiled. They're not in a condition where they could be used anyway. But because of the anxiety that is associated with not wanting to be left vulnerable, people hold on to these things and feel a sense of security in holding on to these things. So if you've just joined us, you're listening to the Life Transformation Radio Show. I'm your host, Michael Hart of Elam Counselling Services, and I want to thank you very much for joining us today. We're discussing, that is Melissa Wagat and I are discussing hoarding, which is a common problem that affects about 5% of the population. If you're not familiar with Elam, you can find out more about us at elamcounsellingministry.com. Elam is spelled E-L-I-M as in man, counseling with 2 L's, elamcounsellingministry.com. You can also find out more about us at 613-699-1677. By calling that number, rather, you can find out more about us by asking us questions about our ministry. You can also contact with us through social media by going to our Facebook page or our Twitter page, which can be accessed from the website at elamcounsellingministry.com. And again, thank you very much for joining us.
And so, Michael, you just finished describing the cognitive distortion that often people who are experiencing hoarding tendencies go through. And I think it really puts into perspective how people can get to the place that they do. And I think having that awareness of the distorted thought process is really helpful to kind of understand that the thought patterns aren't what you or I typically would be going through, and the value they're associating with these items due to this change in thought process is different than you and I would look at that piece of paper. So people out there may be wondering actually why we're even talking about this today. Like, why make a big deal? People are cluttered, their houses are messy. Why do you even have a show dedicated to this? Isn't it just harmless? They just have a bunch of stuff.
That's a good question. And for people who do not have relatives or actual hoarders and who have compulsive hoarding disorder, it's hard to understand why it's such a big deal, because when you think about hoarding, you might think about someone who has a few boxes of CDs that are in the garage, or someone who has a few books on the shelf, for that are not needed and should be thrown out, or just has a messy room. But when we're talking about compulsive hoarding disorder, some of the houses that we have seen are so packed to the point that in the person's bedroom, for example, there's hardly space for them to sleep on the bed. The things have taken over the house. There is hardly space to walk up the stairs. The house is totally taken over with stuff. There is hardly space to walk on the floor. And if you can imagine that kind of a setting where the house is so packed with things, then you can see how that would be a hazard. There are a number of problems that develop as a result of that. First of all, people who have houses in those conditions, they sometimes develop respiratory problems because the house is so packed, jammed, that the smell is musty and there is mold, and it's not a healthy environment to be in. People get sick as a result of being in that kind of a condition. We also see that people who find themselves, whose hoarding is taken over to this extent, their homes become fire hazards, because things are so tightly packed that if there was to be a spark or something electrical that goes wrong, the house would be completely engulfed in no time. And then too, there is the third risk of falling, where people who have their houses so packed you can't walk down the stairs. Then you can see that these people will become susceptible to falling and hurting themselves. So this is the kind of situation we are talking about. It's not just people who have a few boxes here and there. It's people where it's obviously become a problem that needs to be dealt with.
And so in terms of developing this problem, is it a problem that gets worse over time? Like, I imagine most people who end up in these situations where it's packed to the rafters don't necessarily wake up one morning and say, let's fill the house.
Right.
Like, what is the progression to get from I have a few things to I have a postcard size spot on my bed to sleep? Is there a steady progression? How does it normally go through?
Absolutely. I think part of it is just a progression over time. Like, if you have a tendency to accumulate things and not to throw things out, you can understand that the more things you're taking in, it's building up. And if you never part with things, then eventually over time, just by that progression of limited space versus constant increase in things, you're going to get to a point where one day you're going to run out of room. So that's the first part of it. I think too, if you look at the other part of it, the disease itself could be there from the beginning. It just takes time for it to become problematic, because some of the studies show that the early onset of hoarding for a lot of people, for some people, start as early as 13 years old. So it's a tendency that can be there from very early in life, but just progressively gets worse over time. A lot of people who are identified with hoarders are usually older people, and that could be just part of the fact that when you're older, you have time to accumulate a lot more things. When you're older, you don't have parents around that is going to throw things out of your room if it gets to a point where it's going to be problematic for you and your health is going to be belt is going to be at risk. So it's not until later on in life that it usually gets to this point where it becomes a problem that has to be dealt with.
So when it gets to the point where you're actually trying to treat someone who has a compulsive hoarding problem, what type of steps do you go through?
The first step that we would go through is having a detailed assessment with that person to see whether or not there is a hoarding problem. And there is what we call a saving inventory that we go through that helps to see whether or not what kind of things this person is keeping, how difficult it is for them to part with stuff. We have also detailed pictures that we take the person through to be able to identify the state of their household. So that first assessment is very, very important, because you want to get a picture of exactly how bad it is and how long it has been that way. So if the relatives had just gone through the house and threw out everything, and you just get a picture of how bad it is, then that might not be a true scenario. But if you ask how long it has been that way, you get a better idea as to how bad the problem really is. So we do that assessment in the beginning to be able to get a picture of the actual state. So there are actually about 10 pictures that we take them through to say, what is your kitchen really like? What's your bedroom really like? And there's about 10 pictures in each category, where it goes from a bedroom with just a few things on the floor to one where the things are touching the ceiling on the bed or touching the ceiling, and just help the people to see where they fit in. Now, that's very good to have that assessment in the beginning, because that very assessment that we do in the beginning is going to be a measurement later on to see if we are progressing or not. So as part of the treatment, we get the snapshot at the beginning, but we also want to see after treatment how the house is looking. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Is it at the same place? So that assessment is very, very important. We also try to measure for anxiety. What's the level of anxiety that people feel when they think of parting with things? We also want to see what's the cognitive thought that's behind that anxiety. What is the thought that comes to mind? Is it that you are vulnerable to starvation or suffering if you part with these things, or is it just that you think that these things are precious and cannot be replaced? You want to know what it is, because through cognitive behavior therapy, we are then able to challenge that dysfunctional or maladaptive thought and to replace it with thoughts that are more healthy. So you want to be able to assess for those things in the beginning. And as you begin to do treatment, I think the treatment has to be gentle and gradual.
Yeah, so what I'm picturing is this is not the type of treatment where you rent a U-Haul, you back it up into the person's driveway the weekend they're away, fill it with all their stuff, and go give it to Sally Ann. That's not an effective treatment.
No, that's not the treatment. I know that's what on some of these television shows that you see. Yeah,
you have these big interventions and it's very dramatic, but it doesn't seem to actually getting to the root cause, which is what you've discussed there.
Absolutely.
Trying to weed through the layers of the stuff, both physically and also internally, made it get to that point.
Absolutely. I do understand, though, that there are sometimes, if there's real danger, you might want to help the person to take away the danger of them hurting themselves, falling, and so forth. But I think, too, you have to also be sensitive to the feeling of the person you're trying to help, because if you just come in with this sort of I'll do whatever I like mentality and throw away all of the person things, that the person is dealing with extreme anxiety to begin with in parting these things. And if you just throw the things out, then they're going to become even more anxious. But not only that, not only are you making their emotional situation worse, you're also creating a situation where they're going to go back to collecting things again, and it's going to get back to the same situation in just a matter of time, because you haven't really dealt with the root. So part of the treatment that we do is to go to see what's at the root of the hoarding disorder, to help to expose people to more and more anxiety so that they become immune to the feelings of anxiety.
So is that something like an exposure? Is it called exposure therapy?
Exposure therapy, right. So what we would do is something, we would say, well, just start by the first week parting with something. Just get rid of something that you don't have a lot of attachment to. and tell us how that feels. And from there, we gradually go to part with something that you have a moderate amount of attachment to, and you rate how that feel. And then maybe you have to have a series of meetings with these people over several weeks, with them parting with something where there's a moderate attachment. And as they begin to do more and more of that, they're learning to live with the anxiety of parting with things. Then gradually you can get them to part with things that they really feel, oh, I have to have this thing with me or my world is going to fall apart. And then after several weeks of doing that, they get to a point of feeling, you know what, I can actually part with things and it's okay. My world is not going to fall apart. A very important part of dealing with hoarders is that we try to get family members on board as well, because the hoarders themselves may not be very motivated to go along with the treatment. They may also not report correctly as to how they are doing, the state of the house. But if you have family members who they have agreed to be involved with helping them, then these family members can, number one, give you a proper idea of how the house is looking as the treatment progresses. But also, number two, they can be instrumental in helping you to get rid of things eventually, as you get to a point where the hoarder agrees that they're now willing to start getting rid of things. I also want to say that taking care of hoarding has to have a two-pronged approach. It cannot just be getting rid of things, because if you're getting rid of 2 bags of stuff and you're bringing in 3, then you're going to be in a situation where you're getting rid of things, but
accumulating
it's accumulating. It's not moving. So we want to have our clients monitored, the amount of things that they're bringing in each week monitored, to see whether or not there is a net decrease in what is coming into the home.
And so last, I'm wondering if you can give some encouragement. I'm thinking of those family members that are helping people through these situations. As much support as they're providing to their loved one, as you described, it's not a switch, the switch that goes off and suddenly everything's okay. It's a long process. So what would you say to people who are walking with people who are living with this condition?
Well, let me say, first of all, that the cognitive behavior therapy is very, very effective in treating hoarding. It's a measurable type of therapy that we can measure progress over time. So it's not something that's untreatable. It can be treated, and with the right kind of help and patience. Patience is a very, very important aspect of treating this disorder, because I know sometimes family members want to just throw away everything all at once, but that can be callous. So I think there has to be patience where you're able to work with the therapist and work with the client in developing a willingness to get rid of things. So unfortunately, Melissa, we have come to the end of today's program. I want to thank you again for helping us to explore this very important topic. I know that there are family members out there who are struggling with this issue right now.
And we really hope you've learned something through this show, and you can apply it to your life or the life of someone you love, and you can get some help and get out of these type of situations.
And I'd like to really encourage you to give us a call. We can provide you with more information and more help. Again, we want to thank you for listening to this edition of the Life Transformation Radio Show. Until next time, this is your host, Michael Hart of Elim Counselling Services, praying that God would bless you in all your relationships and keep you sound in mind and pure in heart.